Last video, we talked about how to prepare to write a book. Now, let's talk about the actual writing process. Without a doubt, the best way to write a book is by writing regularly. That means making a plan and sticking to it, at least the best that you can, which I know can be hard, but we'll get to that in just a minute. The plan's gonna be a little bit different, depending on if you are a pantser or a plotter. But like I said last video, if you are a completely new writer, or at least new to writing a novel, then you should at least plan a little bit. But how do you do that? If you are a hardcore pantser, then this step will likely not take you a full week. But whether you are a pantser or plotter or somewhere in between, the first thing you want to develop is a story seed. A story seed is the starting point for a pantser and a grounding point for a plotter to work around. It consists of three major elements: a character, place, and predicament. First, you need a main character. You don't need a ton of detail here, but you should at least have a rough idea of what they're like. Try to establish some backstory. Give them a secret to keep from the other characters, a few personality traits, and physical attributes. But most importantly, your character should want something. A character's want drives their decisions, and therefore the plot. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that in just a minute though. The place is the setting. But you aren't just creating a physical space. Consider the time period you're working in. It's often easiest to write in a setting you're familiar with, such as your hometown in the modern day. But it's your story, so if you want to create an entire universe, then do it. But if you're world building a medieval village, you'll need to do some research. And if you're creating a galaxy far, far away, then you'll have a lot of questions to answer for yourself and facets of the world to flesh out. Settings are as simple or as complex as you make them and are a vital starting point. Finally, the predicament is what happens to the character in the place. If you're a pantser, then this predicament should probably occur at the beginning of the book. What happens to the character that kicks off the action? If you're a plotter, it should probably be the overarching conflict of the entire story. In either case, the predicament should break the status quo of the main character's life. These three things are tied together and each depend on the character's want. The backstory and the setting should match it. Let's look at this story seed as an example. A disrespected 10-year-old orphan in London lives under the stairs and wants to escape his situation, then discovers he's a wizard. The 10-year-old's want is tied to the fact that they live in a poor situation and are powerless to do anything about it, which are character details like we talked about before. Then the predicament gives them a path to achieve their want. The predicament doesn't have to help the character get their want though. Say you start with a confident protagonist who has a nice life and doesn't want things to change. Then the predicament could threaten to make things worse. The goal is to create a conflict that has to be resolved. Generally, it's nice if the predicament stands at odds with the character's situation. Things are going well, predicament makes things worse. Things going poorly already, predicament helps things get better. Both of these options break the status quo and make conflict, which is what you want. Having that conflict at the beginning will provide you with momentum. You should be able to develop the story seed in a week or less. Probably. I don't really know how ideas come to you, but it's like a sentence or two. I believe in you. You can do it. You can write 2 sentences in a week. If you're a hardcore pantser, you can go ahead and start writing. But for the plotters and people who feel like they need to spend a little bit more time figuring out their story, it's time to plot. There are tons of ways to tackle plotting. A popular option is to use a tried and true plot structure. There are a ton of different structures you could try out. We even have an entire series on the hero's journey. If there is a plot structure you're familiar with, feel free to use it. But using rigid plot structures can be difficult if you don't have a firm grasp on how they function. They are certainly worth learning about because they are incredible tools. But if you aren't interested in reading a few books on plot structure, then I recommend Brandon Sanderson's bracketing method as a place to start. Imagine your story as a series of open and closed brackets. Each open bracket is a new predicament or conflict or question. The story makes you ask, what will this lead to? And each closed bracket is an answer to a question. This is what will happen. The main conflict of your story will be the largest brackets, situated close to the beginning and end of your outline. But stories aren't made of a single pair of brackets. Regularly inciting and concluding smaller conflicts throughout the story will create a sense of progress. These conflicts don't have to be super flashy either. They can be as simple as two characters having a disagreement that lasts a few chapters. Your job while plotting is to come up with these smaller conflicts, how they relate to the characters, and how they get you closer to that final bracket. No, it's not a great idea to have a straight series of open-closed brackets for the entire story. That can make it feel linear and overly simple. Mixing up when you open and close brackets can help add complexity and reduce predictability. Just be careful how many active conflicts you have at once, since depending on your audience, you can overwhelm the reader with things to keep up with. So with some work and luck, the characters and location and events will all develop in tandem as you plot. The decisions you make will lead you to other ideas. Let's say you decide to build a religion for your world. Then you decide your main character was raised outside of that tradition, which prevents them from entering a city they need to enter. That conflict can lead to another and new ideas. While plotting, everything is constantly changing and flowing together. If you get stuck, pick one aspect of your story and just start adding details to it. That can give you an idea of what needs to happen. Just make sure that you record all of these new details using your organizational system we talked about in the last video. The end goal of all this plotting is to create an outline containing what happens in each chapter of your book. But if you're a newer writer, you might not know how long the plot you're planning will end up being. But you can use some stand-in numbers to help out. If you're writing an 80,000 word novel, that means you need about 10 to 25 chapters, with word counts varying from 3,000 to 8,000 words. Each chapter should only incite or conclude one or two conflicts, and some chapters will only make progress on existing conflicts. We'll say that puts you at between 7 to 15-ish sets of brackets, which means around 10 to 25 planned plot points, since some of those brackets will overlap. Less than that, and you might not have enough content for 80,000 words. More than that, and you may struggle to give each plot point the time it needs. If you aren't a hardcore plotter, you don't have to be so rigid with your planning. You may just want to build a few main characters, do some world building, and then find out how they fit into a handful of major plot points. You can always pants your way through the gaps. Now, pantsers and plotters alike, it's time for what you've all been waiting for. Right. It's time to do the thing we've all been waiting for. Write a book. It's time to write a book. But you have to remember to stick to a schedule and stay organized. Perhaps the most important thing you need to do if you want to actually finish your book is to establish a schedule and stick to it. Set a minimum daily word count and number of days per week that you plan to write. It's best to start low here, say 500 words per day, 5 days per week. Then increase these amounts over time as writing becomes a habit. Starting too big may set yourself up for disappointment if you fail to hit goals and become discouraged. If you like using Google Sheets, you're in luck. We've put together a writing schedule template where you can input the total target word count, the number of weeks you want to spend writing, the number of days per week you expect to write, and the date you start writing. The template computes your daily target word counts and will show you a progress bar as you get closer and closer to finishing the book. Just make a copy of the spreadsheet and input your goals. That spreadsheet will help you adjust your weekly goals to make sure that you stay on track to finish in the time you want. If you're dedicated to getting your book done in the 4-month time frame we're aiming for, you need to make sure that your daily word count gets high enough. For example, if your target word count is 80,000 words and you have 12 weeks to write, you need to produce just over 6,650 words per week. Assuming you write 5 days a week, that's about 1,300 words per day on average. If you start at a lower goal than that, you'll need to compensate by gradually upping your daily goal or writing more days per week, which should be easier as you get used to writing so much. No matter what your word count goals though, make time in your schedule to write. Don't just do it when you happen to have the time. It won't happen, or at least not enough to stay on schedule. You'll likely need to take something you regularly do out of your schedule to make room for writing. Obviously, don't take anything out that compromises your physical or mental health, but you may need to sideline other hobbies for a few months. If you don't take something out of your schedule, likely you'll default to your old habits, and then 2 weeks go by and you haven't written anything. You gotta take something out. Something's gotta go. That's just how it is. There's only so many hours in a day, unless you're just not busy at all. That would be awesome. Not being busy at all. Wow. Also, remember the organizational system we talked about last video. Make sure you take a few minutes when you're done writing for the day to record any new details you came up with on the fly. Just make sure you never go more than 3 days without writing, even if you only write a few hundred words. Otherwise, your story will fade in your mind if you don't keep actively working on it. Preserve your momentum and write as much as you can. And that's just about it. Hopefully these past 2 videos will help you write your book. In review, make sure you decide on a strategy, whether it be pantsing, plotting, planting, anywhere in between. Find an organizational system that works for you, plan your story, make a schedule, then start writing, and stick to your schedule. It's not gonna be easy the first time. Developing a new habit is hard. You may hit walls, you may have some stops and starts, or might not finish in the amount of time that you wanted. That's okay. So long as you keep moving forward and make time to write when you can, you're doing fantastic. The point of all this planning and strategy is to give you something to come back to. Grounding yourself in your work like this will help you finish, even if it's not in the 4 months that you aimed for. You still wrote a book, and that's something to be proud of. And as always, remember, there are no rules. Write what you want and have fun. Thanks for watching.